Okay, so I'll be honest. I leveled this character because she was the only undead character I had that I made like 10 years ago. And played around with the talent since I was basically getting a talent point every level I was doing dungeons. So I was actually getting two, one for the priest talents and one for the shadow talents. So um, even still, I was kind of going over the talents kind of one by one as I was working my way down the tree as I was leveling. So then the heritage armor came out. I did the whole quest chain for that and everything, and then forgot about um, the talents basically. So um, I have came to a training dummy, as you can see. I kind of looked over the talent. I remember some of what I was trying to do because there was a kind of a different build I was going for since I've already leveled a priest to max level. So I've actually already done a overview of the shadow talents. So, however, I don't typically play shadow a lot, so it was about the most I've played shadow for a while. So that kind of going back to what I said about kind of going over the talents, I had a chance to really play with everything and kind of set everything up where the the shadow talents um, kind of synergize, and then the priest talents I kind of took mostly what I needed and stayed away from some of the things that I didn't. So, as I said, there was kind of a um, specific build that I ended up with by the time the whole thing was by the time I got to level 60. Um, so what I'm going to do is kind of a more just casual look at what I took and kind of what I did and didn't do specifically, and then kind of go over some of the core abilities for Shadow and kind of what talents I took for those, and kind of how, as I said, some of the talent really kind of synergize with a few of the abilities for Shadow. So, um, that being said, I'm going to start with the priest talents. The shadow talents were pretty straightforward. It was mainly just working your way down the tree, taking what you kind of needed to take. There really wasn't. There was an option. It just kind of depends on what you wanted to do. I wanted to do, as I often do, just kind of a straightforward build. So with the priest talents, I tried to first of all stay away from a few things. So as you'll notice, like the left side is more your healing, more your kind of holy abilities, if you will, and then the right side is your shadow abilities and your damage abilities, and then the middle is just kind of utility and things like that. So um, I did take at one point renew because I needed something to unlock the rest of the next section of the tree. Also, just to have another heal. So I do have Desperate Prayer, which is good. It's just nice to have another heal. And Renew is a heal over time, so it'll work for me. It'll work for somebody in my group. So it's not a bad thing to take. And as I said, I needed to spend like one more point to unlock the next row in the tree. Um, so that being said, that was as far over in kind of the healing side as I went. I did take Power Infusion, which is kind of eh. Um, to get body and soul, so Power Word Shield would increase movement speed. Um, Not to say that Power Word Infusion is bad, I just don't find a lot of opportunity to use it, at least leveling. I think I used it in a dungeon, like after I got it. Um, I think in part just to use it one time just to see. Um, and I want to say it was what is it? Black Rock. Um, oh, why am I on Cataclysm? Because I'm not max level. That's why. Where? Yeah, there we go. Uh, Brackenhide Hollow. I think that was the one I used it on. So I think we were like on the last boss as I remember. Um, so other than that, took like Dispel Magic, Purify Disease. Um, so I can remove enrages. I can dispel diseases. You get Shadow Fiend. So took everything with like and then down from there is Shadow Word Death. So it took everything that kind of worked with Shadow Word Death. Um, Mind Control. I kind of was setting this up for PvP. Um, Fade, I don't really use a lot. Um, I probably need to. Removes all snare effects, so may come in handy in PvP. Reduces cooldown of Psychic Scream, which is usually pretty good when I've been playing Disc or Holy. Um, and then took some things for that, as you can see. So increases the amount of damage required to break your Psychic Scream by 75%. Um, took Vampiric Embrace over Leech. Just because this can be really good. You can end up doing quite a bit of damage with Shadow. So you have a couple dots, you have some direct damage, and you have a channeled ability. I mean, you have a pretty balanced amount of damage, and everything really hits kind of hard. So everything's really good if you can just get into a situation where you can just run through your rotation. So um, Vampiric Embrace can actually do quite a bit of damage. You can end up being like second or third on the healing uh, meter after a dungeon. So went ahead and just grabbed that. Um, when cast on yourself, 30% of your damage refills your Power Word Shield. So as you see, that's like part of my rotation. After I use Mind Blast, I'll typically use that before I start channeling Mind Fray. And then Power Word Shield instantly heals the target and reflects 12% of the damage absorbed. So just kind of took talents that worked with things I already had. Um, Again, like improved Fade just to spend the point. Took Angelic Baldwork. Angelic Baldwork. There we go. Because it basically is like a cheat death on a 90-second cooldown, so it works pretty well. I've used this on Disc quite a bit. Um, I believe it's a newer ability with this talent system, so I guess this and Body and Soul would be like, and Renew would be like the three I kind of crossed over to the healing side for. So it's a bit weird from a I guess like flavor um, point of view that you would be able to use something like this as a shadow. I guess it's not specific to whether to like the holy or shadow part, but just something that was named angelic. Seems kind of strange you could use it as I have angelic bulwark and void shift, so figure that one out. I mean, I like this. Don't get me wrong, but with the last few expansions and Mage is kind of a pet peeve. They keep making changes and saying, well, we have to the fantasy, the theme, the flavor of the abilities all has to make sense. I'm like, no, it doesn't. If you were actually like an archmage, you would be able to use a frost barrier and fire abilities at the same time. Um, I digress. So there's those. Um, Throws of Pain I mainly took just to spend the points. They do kind of have a chance to increase damage. I guess gain insanity. I was thinking they did something with your mana, but I guess you gain to insanity. So um, insanity will make more sense when we get into the shadow talents. I took some things that help greatly with some of the abilities. So um, and then after damaging or healing a target below 35% health, gain 10% increased damage and healing for 8 seconds. And I think that was about it. So, I don't think I finished saying what I started to about there were certain things I didn't take. So, I didn't take like Angelic Feather, Leap of Faith. I left these alone, Divine Star and Halo, because they really don't have much of a benefit for Shadow as much. And again, like Halo now suddenly is a Shadow ability. Like it's just a weird concept. So I've played with both of these on my other priest, and they work fine. I don't really feel like I need them. Um, you're not going to have a lot of AoE. That's just the nature of Shadow Priests. So there's not really anything you can do. Sitting here taking something like Halo and making it a shadow ability just to try to give you an AoE just doesn't really do much, in my opinion. And once you're able to get like Void Eruption, I mean you have something, so it's not as big of a deal. Um, and then skipped like all the mind game stuff. Like I've played with this on again on my other priest. Like it's fine. It's just kind of a lot. Like you have to use the right thing at the right time, and yeah, so I just kind of wanted to get my dots out, keep Mind Blast on cooldown, and then channel. I didn't want to have to be worrying about a whole bunch of other things, which again, kind of like Power Infusion, like this is the problem. Like it's just something else to use. Um, so that I didn't take Mass Dispel, which may be an issue if I start doing like Mythics or something. People might yell at me for that. Holy Nova, didn't take that. Like just really left a lot of the holy side of the talents alone. So, um, I as I said at the beginning, like by the time I got to level 60, like I was actually really happy with kind of how everything set up because it's a really seamless kind of rotation and the way everything works. Like you don't have a lot of stuff you don't need. So you don't have a lot of stuff like cluttering up your command bar or your spell book or anything like that. I don't know how much I'm going to use Void Shift. I just kind of took it for the talent. I have used it. It can actually be a really good, again, kind of like with Vampiric Embrace. It can be because when you swap, so it'll swap you and your current targeted party or raid member swap health. So it considers that whatever health is being swapped, it considers that healing. So in one fell swoop, like you've healed for like 20,000, according to like recount. So this can be really um, good when I've played with it the few times I have in PvP and in Mythics when I've been like looking over recount afterwards. Um, this can do a lot if you use it at the right time. That's the thing. It's kind of a situational ability. So increases the lower health percentage of the two to 25% of below that amount. So, which health is enough. Like I have 40, so I mean you're fine. Whatever it does swap is going to be a decent amount. So, um, and then for the shadow talent, so as I said, I just kind of went down the tree, just taking what seemed obvious. I'll say just kind of setting it back up the way I always remember it. Kind of taking what I always remember it having. Um, so you start out with Devouring Plague, took Dispersion. There we go. Took Dispersion or Depression, depending on. Took Dispersion, took a talent for Dispersion. Heals you for an additional 25% of your maximum health over its duration, and its cooldown is reduced 30 seconds. So this definitely, more so than with other damage reduction abilities, is really an emergency ability, because you can't do anything once you have this activated. You won't die, most likely, if that's why you're using it, is to get away from, get out of a situation, but you also can't do anything. So you better, when you use it, you better have some idea in mind of what you're doing once it ends, or it just ends up kind of being a waste of time. So silence reduces the cooldown of silence by 15 seconds. So again, might do mythics, might do PvP, not entirely sure. So silence is usually good. Although I don't see, there was a time where taking a spell interrupt was always a good thing, and I'm noticing more recently not so much. Like I'm not using them, at least as a healer. I'm not using them as much as maybe you would think you would be. The bosses, at least in Mythic Plus for Season 2, and generally speaking, for most of the bosses in Dragonflight dungeons, there's really not much to interrupt. Even in the more the worse groups I've been in, we're still able to get through the dungeons fine. Like there's not one mechanic that you have to interrupt, or it just makes trying to get past a boss just impossible. So, um, things that I took that were kind of noteworthy were, of course, shadowy apparitions, which are the little like ghosts that spawn. Misery, which allows Vampiric Touch to also apply Shadow Word Pain. So I don't have to have Shadow Word Pain. One ability applies 2 dots. That's perfectly fine. Shadow Word Pain lasts an additional 5 seconds. So, um, and then, yeah, so took Void Eruption. So you can take Dark Ascension or Void Eruption. Void Eruption would probably be the more obvious one. Dark Ascension used to be a PvP talent. Um, like back when we actually had PvP talents, like in Legion, where they actually had separate rows for PvP talents, and then they started this little like pick 3 kind of thing. Um, it's good. A lot of priests take it. I take it and then I never use it. Because it used to increase. It used to be kind of like an AoE effect. Increases your non-periodic shadow damage. So it's really limited and it only affects you. The original version of this, if I'm not mistaken, was more like an AoE effect. It would affect players around you, or it would affect the player that it was cast on. I think that was more it. I don't think it was an AoE effect. I think it affected the player it was cast on. So that was my problem, was trying to be coordinated enough to use it on the right player at the right time. Or maybe a bit of both. I don't specifically remember. I remember doing Battle of Gilneas for some reason, trying to use it. That memory comes to mind. Um, So mostly staying to the middle, staying away from like Shadow Crash and Mind Spike, all that. So these talents on both sides will kind of have a lot to do with that. Also didn't take Mind Bender, which I kind of went back and forth because usually I do. It's a bit of a improved version of Shadow Fiend, but just decided to stay with Shadow Fiend for the moment. Um, I'm also not max level, so I have more points to get. So I may end up taking this. It just didn't seem like a priority at the moment. Um, and yeah, so I was just looking to see. Yeah. Yeah. So, as I said, kind of wanted to go over some of the more um, kind of the main abilities. So, as I said, Vampiric Touch puts itself and Shadow Word Pain on the target. Mind Blast, Mind Flay, and Devouring Plague, I would say, are about the three main abilities, and these are the ones that have talents in the shadow talents that kind of synergize really well, and to a lesser extent, Shadow Word Death. So if we look up Mind Blast, so I took one. Critical Strike reduces the target's movement speed, which is helpful. Um, so of course works with shadowy apparitions. Um, and then Shadow Word Pain, periodic damage has a chance to reset the remaining cooldown on Mind Blast and cause your next Mind Blast to be instant cast. So, there's two things to point out here. One, there's no percentage chance with this. And that is important for the second reason, which is this actually procs quite a bit. Um, you don't have to wait all that terribly long, especially, see, there you go, boom. So it's incredibly helpful. That's why I don't have two charges of it. And there it is again. Because you really don't need two charges. Um, so that I would definitely say is worth taking. And then Mind Blast has a 10% chance to make your next Devouring Plague cost no insanity and deal 20% additional damage. Now, this does proc, it just doesn't seem to proc as often. And you notice there's a percentage chance with that. 10%, I would beg to differ on that one. The percentage chances I found kind of vary. So I don't know if it's based on like a critical strike chance or if it's just kind of like a random RNG thing or exactly how they figure that out. It does proc, which is very helpful, especially if you are using Void Bolt. You kind of want to save your insanity for that. Keep the uptime on that as much as possible. Um, so worth taking. Just don't expect too much from this. You'll get far more use out of Shadowy Insight than you will out of Mind Devourer. And I think that was it for Mind Blast. So then if we look at Mind Flay, didn't take too much for that. The main thing would be Surge of Insanity, which when you use, basically when you use Devouring Plague, it transforms Mind Flay into a more powerful version of itself. Um, and or Mind Spike if you had it, which I do not. So yeah, so that is definitely worth worth taking. Let me see if I can. You do have to generate insanity, which is kind of the downside for Devouring Plague. Okay, so see, there you go. If you use Devouring Plague, and then that transforms into Mind Flay Insanity, channels faster. So, helpful. You will use Mind Flay a lot. Once your dots are out, once you're waiting for the cooldown for Mind Blast, even if you have 2 charges, you're still going to end up waiting for the cooldown on a charge. You need Insanity for Devouring Plague. Now, the positive thing with Devouring Plague is you can reapply it, and the damage will increase. It's kind of works the same way Ignite does for fire mages in a sense. And then, like, Void Eruption is kind of a situational ability. Shadow Word Death can only be used if the target is below a certain amount of health. So you're going to be using Mind Flay a lot. And as I said, everything does pretty decent damage. I mean, it's a pretty middle of the road, pretty balanced kind of rotation, all things considered. Spec, kind of a, yeah. And I mean, you see I skipped a lot. I didn't build a lot around it. I just kind of took that because that was, as I said, just moving down the tree. You don't have a lot of options the first few like handful of points you get, and then they kind of give you an option. Like I just went straight down the middle, just very simple, very straightforward. Shadow Crash or Mind Spike. So Shadow Crash is more of an AoE ability, if I remember correctly. And then Mind Spike is more like your single target damage. It does Shadow Frost damage, which you don't see very often. I think the only other class I've seen do Shadow Frost damage is Death Knight, if I remember correctly. I think it was Death Knight. So then moving on to Devouring Plague here. So you might see some overlap. So of course, we went over, that's what you get. First thing works with Shadow Reapparitions. Of course, Surge of Insanity. And then of course you have to take it as a talent here. Increases your Devouring Plague damage by 6%. And while that's okay, it's the second part of this effect that makes this worthwhile, and increases your maximum insanity by 50. So as I said, so both of your abilities that are going to mainly consume insanity are Devouring Plague and Void Bolt. After you use this will turn into Void Bolt. There you go, Void Bolt. That's what it looks like. So as long as you have insanity, you can keep spamming this. And that will be where a lot of your damage will come from. As I said, Shadow is a very heavy single target damage spec. So that was very helpful to finally get. Even though 50 doesn't sound like much, it makes a difference. And then, of course, we went over Mind Devourer. Shadow Reapparitions deal 150% increased damage to targets affected by your Devouring Plague. You'll almost always have Devouring Plague out if you're on a target for any length of time, so that's not as much of an issue. Reduces the insanity cost of Devouring Plague by 5, which is actually a lot. So it went from 50 to 45. So when you're trying to generate that amount, and then you need to generate insanity to use the ability. And then in the case of Void Eruption, you need to have more than that in order to use Void Bolt, at least a few, 2, 3 times to make it worth. Um, so while Void Eruption itself doesn't have a insanity cost, Void Bolt does. So you have to bear that in mind. And then, as I said, Devouring Plague can be reapplied, and the damage will just start to stack. So um, that was with Void Touch was super good once I was able to get both of those. So I didn't really struggle with Insanity. Of course, when you're lower level and you're leveling, nothing really works, so to speak, like it's supposed to, because your gear's not where it should be, and the bosses are just like a couple levels above you. So if you're doing like a dungeon or something, I mean, it's not a big deal. You're leveling, you're still getting all your talents and kind of figuring out what you're doing and situating everything. Especially if you're leveling something you've already played at max level, or like with this being the first expansion with these newer talent trees, you're kind of just again kind of setting everything up, seeing what's new, seeing what's not. Some classes have more changes I've noticed than others, which I guess makes sense. Um, so some were pretty straightforward, just as you remember from several expansions ago. There really wasn't much different, and then others seem to have more changes. So I guess that factors somewhere into balancing, I would imagine. Um, so there was that. Devouring Plague causes your Shadow Word Pain and Vampiric Touch to deal damage 80% faster on all targets for 3 seconds. Um, and yeah, so I think that was it. So they all kind of work together. So Mind Blast can proc, um, Mind Flay can proc, Devouring Plague can proc. So as I was showing you, so the Vampiric Touch gets your 2 dots out, and then Mind Blast, Power Word Shield, Mind Flay. We'll use Mind Blast again to generate Insanity, and then Mind Flay again to generate Insanity. That little cannon is from my trinket. And then Devouring Plague, and then Mind Flay Insanity, and then just basically like rinse and repeats. So it's actually a really fun spec to play. I was enjoying myself quite a bit. So as you see, you don't have to wait too long for things to proc, which is nice. The only real downside is that Shadow Priest doesn't have a lot of AoE. It's just a very, very heavy, straightforward kind of single target um, spec. So if you want something to play that is, something you don't have to think about, um, I would say Shadow Priest is it. It is an actual very relaxing spec to play because you're just basically running through your rotation. You don't have to worry about, um, even with the procs, like you don't have to worry about using something at the right time or making sure you have a stack or making sure your damage is here or there. You just kind of use stuff when it procs. So yeah. So there you go. So there was my finally review a little bit more in depth, I feel like, than the first one of Shadow Priest. So, hope you enjoyed that. Hope that was helpful for you, and thank you for watching.